that I warned against, everything that so many people warned against and said, do this so that this doesn't happen, ultimately did end up happening. And I blame those people for their willful ignorance. I do hold a great burden of responsibility for the people who continue to choose not to wear masks, who scoff at the idea of a vaccine, who did not socially distance themselves, who continue to gather in groups. And I do feel that those people carry a large weight of responsibility all over this country, all over this world. And I at the least hope that in light of so many deaths, that they might have a moment of deep introspection. I won't hold my breath for that, but I would at least hope that maybe that might be a possibility.
Yeah. The takeaway for me from this entire pandemic experience is that there's a price to be paid for not addressing ignorance. Too often we sit there and we say, oh, he's just a fucking idiot. Let him have his opinion. There's a price to be paid if we don't address it, whether it's in our own community, right, or throughout the country. Okay, and this is a perfect segue into this one article that was recently published in the New York Times. We're speaking of COVIDiocy, right? And there's an article that basically says that in hundreds of counties around the country, vaccination rates are low, with some vaccination rates languishing below 20%. And this disparity in vaccination rates has so far mainly broken down along political lines. And, surprise, surprise, the New York Times examined survey and vaccine administration data for nearly every U.S. county and found that both willingness to receive a vaccine and actual vaccination rates to date were lower on average in counties where a majority of residents voted to re-elect Trump in 2020. What a fucking surprise, right? I mean, come on. I mean, you don't need the New York Times to tell you that that's probably how things are breaking wherever you're at. And it would be fine, in my opinion, and this may strike some people as somewhat inflammatory for me to say this, if they wanted to jeopardize their own lives, that's fine. Do whatever the fuck you want. But unfortunately, when they refuse to get vaccinated and they allow this virus to run unchecked and to evolve, it could evolve into variants, and then we're all at risk. So it's not just their life they're putting on the line; it's everybody's life. That's why people are concerned about India now, right? We can sit here and say, "Oh, okay, it's India, it's Brazil. Let the pandemic run its course there." What happens though is it becomes a laboratory for the virus, and it becomes a perfect ecosystem for the virus to completely evolve into something we don't have a vaccine for, right? And so that becomes a concern for all of us, all these variants that could evolve. And so it'd be one thing if they were just jeopardizing their own lives. They're not. They're jeopardizing everyone's life. So in this case, idiocy, poses certain risks to the rest of us. Thank God for science for developing a vaccine so quickly, which if you look at the history of vaccines, this is unprecedented that they were able to develop a vaccine, such a highly effective vaccine in such a short amount of time. Now, what's going to jeopardize this brilliant gift provided to us by science? The idiots who voted for Trumpers once again.
Well, and I remember on your first your public critique on KTSM, Ruby, you actually brought up that delineation between personal rights and where your rights end has to do with the consequences affecting not just yourself. Is that more or less it?
Yeah, absolutely. I referred to the great philosopher John Stuart Mill, and I specifically referenced one of his arguments in that the only good reason for censoring anyone's or limiting anyone's personal liberty is if it is going to prevent harm to others. And that's exactly what is happening here, right? Nobody wanted to wear a mask from the get-go, right? Nobody wanted businesses to close or restrict capacity. Absolutely not. But we have to think about this in terms of not just me, my world, my comfort, but for the greater good of humanity, for God's sake. And people that still cannot grasp that, they are the ones that I was referring to when I do place the responsibility of where we are now. I entirely place it on them, because at this point it boils down to willful ignorance. They are literally choosing to just ignore all of the facts a year plus into this.
There's got to be something about American culture that has led to this, because even as bad as India is right now, like the comparison keeps being like second to the United States. And in the United States, you know, with the resources that we have as a nation, we should have done a lot better.
I think it's one of the worst characteristics that we've seen in modern times regarding United States. I would say perhaps part of the culture. There is this culture of people ignoring any type of authority and feeling that because they have an opinion and they have a perspective, it's just as good as anyone else's, right? They come to trust pseudoscience. They come to trust sites that are clearly propaganda. And it's, I think, something that is going to continue to get worse, because more and more people are just equating propaganda with truth, all in the name of, well, my beliefs and my liberties. And it's become a world of my truth, right? Truth is not relative, and it doesn't matter how many versions people want to spew of their own truth, that it defeats the entire purpose of what truth is. I wish that we would see a return to objectivity, a return to reliance on actual authority figures. And it frightens me when I think of the possibility that things are only going to get worse.
Do you think that politically we're starting to see that kind of return with a Joe Biden presidency? We haven't seen you since all these changes have come about. So I'm just super curious as to, like, how do you see this change in our sort of context, in our, you know, social context that we have ever since the presidency has shifted?
I do think it is a step forward, certainly. I can't even fathom the thought of another 4 years, right, under a Trump administration. So certainly Biden is a step forward. There is at least somewhat more of a return to normalcy. And I think I just read yesterday, oh gosh, I knew I would forget the source. They compared how many either untruths or lies in the first 100 days by Trump versus Biden. And Biden was counted at, I believe, 65, whereas Trump was at around 1,300. So that's a huge disparity already.
But the Republicans would say, "Oh, look, he's a liar too." It's
exactly
fine.
Right. Yeah, the whataboutism, and it's really quite sad, the just a blatant lack of taking any sort of responsibility, the disregarding of facts. It's pretty gross. But I do think, to answer your original question, that yes, it's at least a step forward.
I mean, here we are, his first 100 days in office, and we already lead the world in vaccine administration. And he promised 100 million vaccines administered in his first 100 days. He's surpassed that by 100 million. I think it's 200 million now at this point. I guess he's trying to bring us together as a country, I guess. And I think we're as divided as ever, right? But that's not his fault. I think that's just the reality of what America is. And in some cases, there are good reasons why we're divided. I mean, these aren't frivolous reasons. There are serious cleavages in American society that I personally don't think they're going to be resolved in a couple of years, because there are legitimate differences between Americans, legitimate differences in what we believe. There's the crowd that believes that Jewish space lasers caused the California fires. How do you reach across the aisle to talk to them? How do you engage that shit? I don't know. Some of this ignorance cannot be penetrated. It just must be addressed, for lack of a better term. I don't know what else to say.
You know what? One of the things that I have noticed is that without Trump being this amazing go out there and take over the headlines and punch left and right, without that, I have noticed that Fox News, because I have them come up on my news feed, they have turned to the old dirty tricks of journalism in really paying attention to crime and like horrible crimes, like some awful violence or some, but ultimately a lot of stories of dramatic, awful things that don't necessarily affect the community, which I call crime reporting. And I see it as a way to cheat attention. Instead of bringing journalism to the table, you bring just horrible news. And without Trump, they have had to go back to this kind of dirty, ugly journalism because he was very, very good at being chaotic and being out in front and saying ridiculous things. I remember the first time that I realized like he's just playing was when he accused Obama of actually literally founding ISIS. Like, and they're like, "Oh, you mean it figuratively?" He's like, "No, I mean it literally because I know that that's going to take the headlines for the next 12 hours, right?" And so that's when I realized, like, he's playing all the dummies. And I guess I've been a dummy because I was trying to take him seriously. And so now that they don't have this person that really understood this attention-grabbing, fear-mongering thing, it's a lot more watered down. And I say that with utter happiness because ultimately I think you can't get rid of this stuff, but you can relegate it into ridiculousness and just kind of morbid fascination for a small, tiny segment of the population. I know that the Republican Party seems hell-bent on finding their next cult leader superstar. And I think that, as crazy as it sounds, Trump had a knack for it,
No, it's not crazy. Hey, he knew exactly what he was doing. He's as profoundly stupid as he is, he knows exactly what to say to get people to support him and to get all riled up and feel like he's on their side. So yeah, as idiotic as he is, he knew exactly what he was doing. But you hit the nail on the head, Haza, when you said the fear mongering. That's absolutely what this is. This is propaganda designed to instill fear. It's an age-old tactic, and it's reached some, I think, record levels, especially in our modern day age, right, of technology and social media and how quickly information is spread. But yeah, I think that watered down fear, what did you call it, crime reporting? It's laughable, but also deeply, deeply upsetting.
Mm-hmm. If we really want to address what we do about ignorance, like Aldo mentioned earlier, like what can we do on that level? The people that are propaganda consumers, how can we reach to, people that I myself know that are suffering from vaccine hesitancy because they want to see like, how it works out when they give it to people. And I'm like, do you remember that all last year we were waiting on it because scientists were waiting to see what would happen to people? Like we did that. Like you waiting right now, what are you going to find out? Like the scientists waited so that we could find out. Now they're good. Now take it. And they're still like, man, I don't know. I'm going to just wait and see. And, like I stand there with just an enormous feeling of frustration because, what's that phrase? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. How can we reach our fellow COVIDiots? How do we get there?
That's the $1 million question, Haza. That's really what we all need to think about as far as our individual roles. And I think we may have even addressed this before, because I believe I remember saying the most important thing that we can do is something like this, right? Continue to talk about it, continue to bring